Yo, salute to you, OP man. I really appreciate the email. Honestly, man, learning from your mistakes. As long as you learn from your mistakes, and that's a great thing. And you could be helping someone with your story. Of course, learning from the mistakes of others is the best. If you can do that, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Trust me. Two stories of back to back betrayal. If you need me to shorten it, send it back and I will do so. Confidentiality, please. Thanks. True Nation. I'm not even sure my story qualifies to be shared, but here goes. This took place in the late 80s before cell phones. My reason for sharing is unintentionally received the equivalent of a PhD in infidelity, and it helped me qualify the candidacy of my current wife when dating her months following the end of my second fiance's infidelity. Such knowledge I want to share and do so with young men and women when given the opportunity. Nothing in life outside of deep religious belief can prepare you to battle infidelity. I sustained two consecutive relationship betrayals back to back over a 4 or 5 year period, so we'll start here with betrayal one. I think it's fair to start with my life prior to the betrayals. To be honest, I had accumulated somewhat of a high body count in my early and mid 20s. I hit them and quit them on a regular basis. I wasn't a player by any stretch, but was certainly an opportunist. If offered, I was taking. I never tapped a woman who was girlfriend, fiance, or wife of someone else. That I knew of, except once when I found out after the fact. Apparently, in this one instance, a person living below my friend heard us the night before. My lady friend lived on the third floor of an older home, and the woman living below her saw me leaving my lady friend's apartment the next morning and then called her boyfriend. My lady friend called me the next day, indicating she was busted and to never call her again. I found out later that she was engaged. That should have taught me a lesson right there, but it didn't because all I was looking for was a good time, so I just looked forward to the next one. By the way, I think a lot of APs are seen by betrayed men as players. They're not. They're just normal guys who were given opportunities by wives and girlfriends. I know men who are BS don't want to hear it, but it's the truth. Anyways, fast forward a year or two, and I moved to a large eastern city. My first job was working sales at a car dealership. During my break and my first week of training, I introduced myself to an attractive woman at McDonald's. I had minimal break time, so I had to work efficiently and got her number before returning to the dealership. She was slightly older, maybe in her early to mid 30s, as I found out later, but we began dating. I'll refer to this woman as Alexis. She and I started talking over the phone and such, but in retrospect, we had nothing in common aside from the fact that I was attractive to her and she was attracted to me. If either of us were unattractive, I wouldn't even be writing this story because I nor she would have given one another the time of day. A few weeks later, talking and spending time together naturally leads to sex. Ironically, that's when things started downhill. Months went by and the relationship was unlike any I'd ever had. Our backgrounds, outlook, and temperaments were entirely different, but since I'd always walked away from tenuous relationships, I thought I'd stay for a change and work it out like adults do instead of just up and leaving. Also, perhaps because I was just starting out in a new city and was living with relatives until I got on my feet. But somewhere along the way, I lost some confidence and esteem. Alexis was tense and emotional, edgy, and very defensive and confrontational, whereas I am and slash was easygoing, laid back by nature. Approximately 10 months or so later, out of nowhere, Alexis half-kiddingly asks me if I would still have sex with her if she was engaged or married. I really didn't know how or what to think of her question, but took it as a compliment that she liked the sex well enough to even consider this nonsensical thought. She asked a few more times, actually, and for some reason, I brushed it off, thinking it couldn't be real, or she was trying to indirectly compliment me. Flag. As mentioned, this woman was beautiful and sexy, and I believe she had many relationship options, and those options were with men with means and money that I didn't have at the time. Still, I was blind because she was beautiful, sexy, and most of all, sexual. Flag number two was her emphasizing I couldn't visit her apartment unannounced. Although common sense says this is a huge red flag, I was blinded as I also felt she was out of my league and postured myself as such. More on that later. The sex was off the charts and kept my blinders firmly over my eyes. It became the foundation of our relationship. I believe she too was blinded by it and wanted a more established man, but I had her whipped just like she had me whipped, if you know what I mean. Simple misunderstandings or miscommunication became intensified verbal exchanges which were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. After each phone argument, she'd straight out ask if I could come over for sex. Aside from our physical compatibility, she didn't know how to apologize or resolve differences when it was her fault, and solved it with sex as a means to reset the relationship. In retrospect, sex was her cure, all to hide her inability to cope with things. Fast forward a year or so, and this pattern continues, but it seems like we're always able to overcome rug sweep things with lots of sex, and it helped that we lived in separate dwellings, although by this time I'd gotten an apartment. After a couple of years or so, I'd crazily reasoned we can be life partners and asked her to marry me. Hey, you live and learn, but it was a stupid thought. The combustibility of our relationship increased after this. However, I was no longer making excuses for myself being younger, less mature, and less accomplished. I also didn't care that she was further along in her career with more assets. I used to be embarrassed by this, but I started to realize women didn't care about it as much as I thought. Her high anxiety personality started to ramp up, though. As my career began to take off, my confidence did as well. Perhaps she found my disposition a threat to her, as she always seemed to have an edge over me from a power dynamic perspective. I was not passive, but was laid back, hence appeared passive to some. At this point, a series of incidents or circumstances happened in succession over a year's time. 1. Distance started. She was not available and was very, very brief during phone discussions. 2. She was emotionally and verbally abusive. Constant complaining, but always resolving and compensating with sex following every argument. 3. She oddly begins telling me of an NBA player wanting to be with her. What the heck is she thinking? She wasn't telling me as a means of complaining. She was providing me with this information proudly and impressed with herself. This was a critical turning point for me. She's raving about his body and kind of bragging to me as if I'm her girlfriend. It was the beginning of the end. 4. She's not answering her phone late at night. 5. I visited unannounced one night. She wouldn't let me in her apartment but met me outside. We talked briefly, and as I was leaving, I hugged her tightly. This was the absolute height of my simpness. She didn't even respond with a fake hug, and she never lifted her arms, not even a little bit. They hung straight down by her side. It was as if she wanted to demonstrate that I could love her, but her love for me was optional if I was lucky. I was shamelessly a full and willing participant of the pick-me dance. I was pick-me dancing with my own fiancée, a woman I had 2.5-year relationship with. I was embarrassed as I was always confident and fearless in relationships, and here I am now happy to chew on any bone she might throw in my direction. I desperately turned to my pastor, who turned me around in less than 10 minutes. After I sat down with him and explained what was happening, I told him I was going to send my fiancée a bouquet of flowers with a card. He was listening intently, just like any advisor would, but my comment about sending Alexis flowers seemed to get his attention. I recall him reclined in his office chair, but sitting forward with intensity to respond to my idea of the flowers. He asked, "Why would you do that?" I was perplexed and didn't understand why he would question such a nice gesture, but I had no answer for him. He went on to speak about dignity, self respect, and not compromising for someone who has treated me in this manner. Essentially, he was saying, get out of your simp thinking and get your stuff together. When I left the church, I felt emboldened. My first action representing a new posture was asking Alexis how things were going with her and the NBA player. I'd reasoned by now that if her respect for me was so low that she felt comfortable telling me about another man desiring her and her ogling him, then I was severely mistaken about her being a significant other, no less my fiance or wife. For reasons I can't remember, I never made a declaration or had a moment to telling her it's over. I just emotionally and physically withdrew from her to where the power balance tilted towards me. I probably wanted to witness the power dynamic change, and that's what happened. I took every opportunity to ask how she's doing with her NBA buddy, which was an indirect way of me saying to her that no longer did I not care, but I was also indifferent enough to the point of asking how she's doing with other men, which was the opposite of her she expected. I believe she wanted me to compete for her, but my taking the offense and asking her how it's coming along with him threw her off. In fact, she began getting irritated at me questioning her about him and implied I was acting in a way that she had to question my sexual preferences. That's when I knew I had her. The way I looked at it was she was openly telling me about the NBA player wanting to tap it, and if she felt so little respect that she could openly and proudly tell me about it, then I sure as hell wasn't going to humiliate myself by taking it. I think she wanted to see me squirm, but here I am throwing it back in her face. I think this caused her to become mean, snappy, and dismissive of me because she was losing control. So her next move was to stop communicating altogether, so I screwed up by phoning her from time to time. When I did, she would not say anything or provided one-word answers. Admittedly, after a few calls like this, I was humiliated once again, losing some of the edge I had gained by controlling the narrative around the NBA player. By this time, she's not available for me. She's not calling or trying to see me, and there's no sex or meetups. Enough was enough. I again felt disrespected and dismissed. Without reading it anywhere, I instinctively went no contact, which was somewhat easy since we didn't live together. I unplugged my landline phone, pre-cell phone days, and stored it deep in a closet underneath a bunch of clothes, discouraging me from using it for weeks. I figured regaining my confidence and self-esteem was directly tied to my ability to maintaining no contact. Literally none. Cold turkey. I developed a self-disciplined daily routine from January through March of up early to work, stayed late at work, watch TV for an hour, and repeat the next day. Approximately 10, 12 weeks passed without any contact. Ironically, I met wayward fiancée too, who we'll call Kate, the first weekend in March. My company hired her as a temp employee as she was finishing up law school. After 2-3 months, I'm recovering rapidly each day. I'm gaining confidence and starting to frequent establishments as spring comes into season. The intern's office is right next to mine. I'm being nice and she's being pushy. She's nerdy, chubby, and assertive. She's asking me questions about relationships, etc., but I'm just getting out of a tenuous relationship and wanted to start just living and having fun once again. However, Kate didn't want to hear it, but she grew on me and I was still vulnerable. I caved and went along for the ride as it was nice being with someone who was pleasant, wanted to be with me, and pursued me. Alexis starts calling me at my apartment around this time as I'd reconnected my phone to take calls now that I was over her. She's asking where I've been, and I'm playing along like she is, pretending as if nothing had happened. I'd just say, I'm doing this or that, and then moving the discussion along and ending it earlier than she wanted. Fast forward a few weeks, and Kate and I are starting to hang out a lot. We attended a concert one evening, and I spent the night at her apartment for the first time, which was a really good thing. When I get home Sunday evening, the moment I arrive in my apartment, my phone rings, and it's Alexis. She's asking where I've been. I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? I ask why she is asking. She says because her aunt saw me and Kate in line, waiting for the gates to open for the concert. Alexis knows I stayed over someone's place because she drove and knocked on my apartment door at 7 a.m. the following morning. Her aunt saw me and Kate. This is where the transition from Alexis to Kate occurs. Apparently, Alexis's fog had lifted, and her aunt seeing me with Kate jolted her. A week or two later, Alexis asked if I could come over to her place because she wants to discuss something with me. By this time, not only am I seeing Kate, but I have quite a few prospects lined up and having a ball with single life. I was no longer inconveniencing myself for her, and going to her apartment to talk was an inconvenience. I preferred going to her place so that I could more easily control when our talk ended, and I was leaving. For weeks I told I was busy, and I'd let her know when I would be available to her. Anyway, this woman who I'd never seen cry before or after was now telling me that we as a couple could have something special if I would consider reconciling. She's not dramatic in her crying, but just a tear or two, which is very unlike her. But that was all broken down now, as she was pleading for us to get back together. I'd always say, we'll see, hoping she'd just move on. She evolved into a friend with benefits, but that was the end of us. In the end, I'm 99.99% sure of infidelity, but she was smart and conniving. I knew there would never be a confession, as she had too much pride and savvy to admit it. I never wanted her back, so therefore it was never a fact I needed to confirm. I was 100% sure in my gut. Kate and I were just getting started. As my relationship with Alexis was winding down, the one with Kate was just starting. As I mentioned earlier, I really didn't want a relationship, but Kate was very persistent, and she was a better match for me than Alexis was. In July, after 2.5 years with Kate, we get engaged. But just 2 months later, things change as Kate starts working late nearly every night. She was a law clerk at a courthouse, and she said she was studying for the bar exam after her workday instead of fighting traffic. She said she could get 3 5-hour study time in the quiet of her office, never mind the fact that she had her own apartment. I always supported people working hard for their career, and cheating never crossed my mind. I made myself scarce so that she could dedicate herself to her profession. The problem was she was never available. No return calls, no initiated calls from her, no contact, nothing. In the meantime, a friend of mine said he saw her return to her apartment building around 6 a.m. a couple of times, as his girlfriend lived in the same building. I still didn't think she was cheating, though, which in retrospect was unbelievable. I didn't believe it because nothing was wrong in our relationship. Well, after about 4 weeks of little to no contact, it finally settled in. I've been through this before and knew how to respond. I immediately stopped initiating contact, and no contact was made the entire month of October. In the first week of November, she called me and offered to take me out for my birthday, a few days away. I knew she was cheating, but had nothing to go on and wasn't going to humiliate myself trying to confirm it. After my previous relationship, I wasn't less tolerable and resigned myself to the fact that our engagement was over. I was more confident this time and knew my worth, although I was still emotionally impacted. During my birthday dinner, there was an air of tension from the big elephant in the room. I never asked her anything, and she never volunteered to say what was happening. On a funny note, I'll never forget the waiter bringing out an appetizer called pate, which I found out is actually liverwurst, the stuff I used to make sandwiches with when I was a kid. One slice cost $7 bucks. Such BS, but I wasn't paying, so anyway, this dinner date conveyed everything to me I needed to know in an unspoken manner. She volunteered nothing, and I asked nothing. I'm not exactly why she asked to take me out, other than her not doing so would confirm she had moved on, and she wasn't ready to tell me so. Fast forward 1 month to the first week of December. She calls me at my apartment out of the blue for our first talk outside of the birthday dinner in nearly 3 months. My first thought was, she just wanted to break up and remain friends. I was kind of quiet trying to get a feel for where the conversation was going or what did she eventually want to get to. After awkward small talk, I begin to see she doesn't have a game plan or question or point to discuss, and I begin to ramp it down to end it because there is nothing to talk about. I remember rushing it because a basketball or football game was about to come on TV. 2 days later, the same thing happened. Same results. She's small talking, but I'm not a small talker, and there's literally nothing to talk about. Plus, I'm starting to get bothered by the fact that she's not offering any explanation for 3 absentee months, and I wasn't asking for strategic purposes. I take some delight in her having to create discussion, but she'd placed herself in this position. She calls a third time a couple days later and wants to get together. I agree. I'd thought about it and had a motive, and we met a central location between our apartments. My goal was to find out one thing. Did she have sex with him? I wasn't asking if there was someone else. I was jumping straight to the only question that mattered. We get to the Irish pub. It's snowing outside, and we're one of the last ones left. I asked her for 1.52 hours about the sex she gave up. Personally, I don't care as much about emotional affairs. I'm only interested in penetration. She admits to seeing another guy who worked in her building. I kept asking her about the sex, but it a cruder way that involved 4 words. I knew she did, but I just wanted her to say it, as it's the only reason why I meet with her in the first place, and I wanted to get my money's worth. After denying for 90 minutes, I finally received a yes, which was a weak one, with her head down, her hand shaking a little, while holding the wine glass and a tear running down her cheek. That was all I needed to hear. She said she had sex just once. This woman loved sex, so there was no way it was once. It was very frequent and voluminous. I went stoic while she started to plead her case to get things back to where they were. I have a bad habit of avoiding confrontation, so I would just nod and say, "We'll see." For anyone that knows me, that's a 100% no. Still, however, I attended her law school graduation party a week later, and I got to see her parents, who I loved. While at the party, I try to leave sneakily while she's talking to a small group of people. As I'm put off by her presence, and I don't know if AP's there, and I'm not going to be there where he knows me. But I don't know who he is. She sees me out the corner of my eye and follows me out into the hallway and tries to embrace me, but I couldn't even look her in the eye while asking if we'll see one another again. I just nodded to get away. For reasons I can't even believe or remember, I attended a New Year's Eve party with her. In almost symbolic fashion, the last hours on the last day of the year is where I achieved the clarity that moved me from limbo to being gone. At this couples only party, I find myself avoiding being in the same room with her. I make a million excuses to getting something to eat, getting a drink, or seeing an old friend. I'm still put off just being close to her. I was supposed to be with her, but didn't want to be with her. Bad sign. At the stroke of midnight, I gave her a quick peck and couldn't even look her in the eyes at any point that night, let alone 12 midnight New Year's Eve. It was the last time I would see her for another 6 months. She sought to reconcile with me over the next 18 months, and by this time, I was deep into a relationship with my current wife, who I'd met in June, 6 months later. I was hoping Kate would just ride away in the sunset, but that wasn't happening. She was unbelievably possessed to get me back and stalked me and my current wife for nearly 2 years. The only reason she stopped was because I called the police. They followed up by having a detective call her, and it was immediately effective. She hadn't taken the bar exam yet, and any investigation or charge against her could have ruined her career before it started. She called me the next day and promised to never bother her or my girlfriend, current wife, again. It ended there. The education I'd learned with back-to-back infidelities provided me with an unbelievable education in the dynamics of relationships going downhill. My wife and I married 3 years after my breakup with Kate, and we've had 30 infidelity-free years together. With 2 consecutive infidelities, lots of casual dating relationships, and a 30-year marriage, here's my relationship wisdom summary. 1. Know your worth. If you don't know it, find it. If you believe it's low, raise it. Your self-worth is your personal power and the only tool available to you at the time you need it the most. No court system, spouse, family member, or friend can compromise your personal power and will if you recognize you have it. It's an unstoppable force that you have to focus on for it to work for you. You have no control over your spouse, divorce laws, and a myriad of other adversarial forces. All you have is you. Believe in you no matter what. For believers, believe in the God that's within you. 2. Your power yields options. Options are liberating. If you have no options, you will revert to thinking your life's fate has been determined. The person with the options holds the power, which is why you see betrayed spouses feeling powerless and wayward spouses seemingly empowered because they believe they have 2 options and the betrayed spouse none. 3. Go with your gut. Believe it. I never confirmed my first fiance's infidelity and barely confirmed my second one's infidelity. I didn't have to confirm what I already knew. If I relied upon them to tell me the truth, then that meant I was yielding my power to them. They instinctively know this and will gaslight and manipulate you to deepen your despair and weakness. Why would I believe a liar and known manipulator before myself? Cheating women are unimaginatively ruthless beyond belief. They will not care about you. It's hard to believe this, but when they are in the throes of an emotional, lustful affair, nothing is off base for them. Nothing, you included. 4. Walking away or going no contact isn't necessarily to end the relationship, although it could and sometimes should. It's what I call mental and emotional quarantining of yourself to heal and regain your emotional and mental health. It is when you are healthy that you have the wherewithal to determine how best to proceed with your life. Don't save the marriage. Save yourself and your kids by healing yourself and protecting the kids. 5. The hardest part of self-quarantining is white-knuckling the pain and getting through the first days, weeks, and months. It's like working out and lifting weights. You get a little stronger each day. Just like you see muscles in the mirror, you will begin to see strength in your ability to self-contain and heal yourself. There is strength in this. 6. Men who grew up with divorced parents, and even those who grew up in a 2-parent household, have this idealistic view of parents under one roof as being the best and only option. The best option is attaining love and peace within the household, period. If the parents can live lovingly and peacefully, then by all means pursue it. But if the wife is cheating, she actually is very likely capable of imparting harm, as a woman in love with an AP will prioritize the AP above all else. You are the first defense against this, and it's up to you to protect them from the ways of their mom until she shows months of contrition and remorse. My best friend lived in a traditional home with a mom, dad, and sister. I began to see significant tension in our early teens, but didn't know what it was, but it was palpable. Once we became adults, he ran it down to me. His dad was a womanizer and had many infidelities, including a longtime girlfriend. My friend is in his 60s now, and neither he or his sister has had healthy long-term relationships, and admittedly, he has issues shaped by the dysfunctionality of his family life. He said he sought to refuge over my house regularly. All this time, I thought his house was like mine, but it was only because it looked like it, but in reality, it was very different. Contrarily, another friend of mine was raised by a very happy single mom. His childhood experience was as healthy as one could be. So, I would say to those holding on to a family ideology, it's well beyond the mother-father under one roof scenario. Look deeper and simply give the kids the love and seek to create peace and happiness. It's the difference between a cool, overcast, and rainy day versus a warm, sunny day. Choose bright and sunny. I could write a book on this stuff, but it's already too long, so I'll stop here. True Nation, thanks for your work. It's needed. I wish I had a resource when going through the trauma of infidelity.